Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're heading into the Gospel of Matthew, specifically chapter 15. It's a fascinating section that tackles tradition, faith, and the real meaning of purity.
Oh, it's a good one. You've got Jesus challenging the status quo, some pretty bold teachings, and even a story that I think will inspire anyone struggling with doubt.
Sounds intense. But before we get into all that, let's set the scene.
Yeah, context is key.
So we're in the thick of Jesus' ministry. He's teaching, healing, and ruffling some feathers along the way.
Especially with the Pharisees. They were the religious leaders, the keepers of the law, so to speak, and they're about to have a little showdown with Jesus.
It all starts with this seemingly minor issue, hand washing.
The hand-washing debate, a timeless classic.
Right. You'd think it's just about hygiene, but for the Pharisees, it was a major deal.
It was about ritual purity, demonstrating your devotion through outward actions. And to them, Jesus' disciples were breaking the rules.
So they confront Jesus and basically say, hey, why aren't your guys following the hand-washing tradition before meals?
It was a direct challenge to Jesus' authority. Yeah. And his response is brilliant. He turns the tables on them.
He points out that they're so fixated on these man-made traditions that they've lost sight of the heart of God's law.
Yeah, he basically calls them out for being hypocrites.
Yeah.
They're all about outward appearances, but their hearts are far from God.
He even brings up the commandment to honor your father and mother, showing how they've twisted it with their own rules.
It's like they're finding loopholes, you know?
Yeah.
They're following the letter of the law, but ignoring the spirit of it.
And that leads to his really shocking statement. He says it's not what goes into a man's mouth that defiles him, but what comes out.
Whoa. Talk about a mic drop moment. I mean, can you imagine being there? The Pharisees must have been fuming.
Right. But this is where Jesus flips the script. He's shifting the focus from outward actions to inner transformation.
He's saying true purity isn't about rituals or what you eat. It's about what's in your heart.
And he goes on to list all these things that defile a person. Evil thoughts, murder, adultery, theft, you name it.
The dark stuff. The things we try to hide. He's saying that's the real source of impurity.
And then he drops the singer, comparing the Pharisees to blind guides leading the blind.
Ouch. It's a powerful image, and you can tell he's not holding back. He's calling them out for their lack of true spiritual understanding.
It's almost like he's saying, if your own vision is blurry, how can you guide others towards the light? But hold on, because we're about to meet someone whose faith could light up a whole city.
Yes, the Canaanite woman. She's a force to be reckoned with. Her story is like a master class in persistent faith.
So picture this. We've got this woman, desperate to see her daughter healed. She comes to Jesus, crying out for mercy.
And at first, Jesus doesn't say a word. It's almost like he's testing her, seeing how far she'll go.
And to add to the drama, the disciples try to brush her off.
You know, like, sorry, lady, wrong crowd, move along.
But she doesn't give up. Even when Jesus says, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel, implying that she's not part of his target audience.
He even uses this analogy about children's bread not being meant for dogs, which, on the surface, sounds pretty harsh.
Right. But this woman is quick on her feet. She doesn't get offended. Instead, she uses his analogy to her advantage.
She says, truth, Lord.
Yeah.
Yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. I mean, come on, that's brilliant.
She's acknowledging her place, her humility, but she's also saying, look, even a tiny scrap of your grace is enough for me. And you know what? It works.
Jesus is impressed. You can almost hear him smiling as he commends her faith. He says, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt.
And boom, her daughter is healed instantly. It gives me chills every time I read it. This woman's faith was a force of nature.
It shows that true faith isn't passive, it's bold, it's persistent. It's willing to keep asking even when the answer seems like a no.
It's a reminder that sometimes we have to push through doubt and uncertainty to experience a breakthrough. But wait, there's more. This chapter takes us from this intimate encounter to a much wider scene of Jesus' power in action.
The stage gets a lot bigger. Now we're talking about a whole multitude of people who were brought to Jesus.
And they're suffering from all sorts of things. Blindness, lameness, paralysis. You can practically feel the desperation in the air.
And Jesus heals them all, one by one. It's like a wave of healing washes over the crowd.
Talk about a visual. You can almost hear the gasps, the sighs of relief, the murmurs of amazement. But then the story takes another turn. Amidst all this healing, we see another need emerge. Hunger.
They've been so caught up in Jesus' teachings and miracles that they haven't even thought about food.
But Jesus notices their hunger. He sees their need and tells his disciples, I will not send them away fasting lest they faint in the way.
And the disciples are like, hold up, how are we going to feed all these people? We're in the middle of nowhere.
They only have 7 loaves of bread and a few small fish. It's a logistical nightmare.
Right. You'll be like trying to feed a small army with a picnic basket.
But Jesus, being Jesus, takes what they have, gives thanks, breaks the bread, and somehow it multiplies. There's enough to feed everyone.
And not just feed them. There are leftovers. I mean, can you imagine that? It's mind-blowing.
It's a miracle, plain and simple, but it's also a powerful lesson about gratitude, about sharing what we have, even when it seems like it's not enough.
And that's a message that resonates even today, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It reminds us that even the smallest act of generosity, when given with a grateful heart, can have a ripple effect far beyond what we can see.
And that's the beauty of these stories, isn't it? They're not just historical accounts. They're filled with timeless wisdom that can still speak to us today. It's like a reminder that with faith, even the tiniest bit of generosity can have a huge impact, more than we can even imagine.
Yeah, it's like a physical example of what Jesus was saying earlier, right? About true purity coming from within. He wasn't hung up on empty rituals. He cared about meeting people's needs right there in front of him, whether it was spiritual or physical, like when they were hungry.
And, if we zoom out a little bit, it kind of foreshadows the Last Supper, too.
Right.
Jesus taking bread, giving thanks, breaking it, and sharing it.
Oh, you're right. It becomes so much more than a meal. It's about connecting with his sacrifice and his love.
Exactly. So looking back at all of this, I think this deep dive into Matthew 15 is giving us some pretty powerful challenges, and some encouragement for us today.
For sure. We've seen that stark difference between outward rituals and real inner purity. The power of faith that won't quit, and we've seen how compassionate Jesus was.
It makes you think about the traditions we hold on to that maybe actually get in the way of real faith. Are we more worried about how things look than the state of our hearts?
That's a good point. And looking at it from the other side, are we willing to be like that Canaanite woman? To be that persistent in our faith, even when we hit roadblocks or get answers that seem harsh?
Her story is like the ultimate reminder that God sees those with humble, bold faith. It's not about earning his favor. It's about admitting what we need and coming to him with open hearts.
I love that. And one last thing, are we showing that same compassion that Jesus had in our own lives? Are we trying to help those around us, both with their physical needs and spiritual needs?
These are good questions to think about. This chapter is packed with so much meaning. It really makes us look at our own beliefs and how we act.
It's amazing how these ancient texts can still be so powerful today, isn't it?
It really shows how timeless and relevant Jesus' teachings are. They go beyond culture and history. They offer guidance and hope to anyone who wants them.
And that's the best part of a deep dive like this. It's not just about learning stuff. It's about letting these truths change us from the inside out.
It's like peeling an onion.
Right.
There's always another layer to uncover, another layer to understand.
And sometimes those layers can be a little tough to deal with, like when Jesus seems harsh or distant.
Oh, for sure. But it's so important to think about the context, the culture, and how these stories were originally told.
It's easy to look at it from our modern perspective and miss those nuances.
Exactly. That's why it's so helpful to really think about these passages. Ask questions. Wrestle with the hard parts.
Because that's how we grow, right? When we're willing to question our faith and not just accept things blindly.
You got it. Faith isn't about blindly accepting everything. It's about searching for truth and understanding.
So as we wrap up this part of our dive into Matthew 15, I think it's safe to say we've covered a lot. From tradition to faith to compassion, this chapter is full of insights.
Yeah, it's a reminder that true faith isn't about outward stuff. It's about an internal change that shows up in our words, actions, and how we treat other people.
It's about being brave enough to challenge what we think we know and to try to understand more deeply what it means to follow Jesus.
And it's about believing in that persistent faith, knowing that God sees those who come to him humbly and truly want his will to be done.
Well said. I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about and use in our lives.
I agree. And maybe one last question for our listeners to chew on. We talked about the Canaanite woman and her strong faith. But what about the faith of the people who brought their sick and hurting loved ones to Jesus? What did their faith look like? How can we build that kind of faith in our own communities today? A faith that believes in healing and hope, even when things are tough.
Now, that's a great question to think about as we go through our week. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll be back next time to explore another fascinating passage. It's easy to focus on the big miracles, but the faith of those people who brought their loved ones to Jesus, that really gets to me. Imagine carrying your sick child or your friend, hoping for a miracle, even if it seems impossible.
It shows how much they believed right. They must have heard the stories, heard about the healings, and clung to that hope. It wasn't just the sick people who had faith. It was a whole community coming together to support them.
That's a powerful thought. A whole community united by hope. And that leads to your question from last time. How can we build that kind of faith today in our own communities? That belief in healing and hope, even when things look bleak.
That's the challenge, isn't it? We read these stories, we're amazed.
Uh,
But how do we live them out? I think it starts with realizing that faith isn't a solo thing. It needs community.
So being there for one another, sharing stories of hope, maybe even challenging each other to believe that miracles can happen.
Exactly. We need those reminders, those nudges to look beyond what we see right now and see the potential for something more.
Right.
Like that crowd in Matthew 15.
Yeah.
We can help each other, lift each other's faith,
Yeah.
and create a space where healing and hope can grow.
Like a ripple effect. One person's faith makes another person's faith stronger, and so on. And who knows? Maybe we'll see miracles happen when we choose to believe together.
I think so.
Well, this deep dive has given us a lot to think about. From facing our own hypocrisy to embracing that never give up kind of faith and learning to build a community of belief in healing and hope.
It reminds us that faith isn't just about what we believe as individuals. It's about how we live it out, together, supporting each other, and daring to believe in what seems impossible.
I like that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Matthew 15. We'll see you next time for another exploration.